ठीक। हाँ। Previous thing is going on. ठीक है. But there's no sound, no?
Sound will come. 1 minute. Sound is here.
Or someone else has to be on it. ठीक है. So
The speaker is on.
the sound is this one? This
Yeah,
one?
yeah, the speaker is on. Yeah.
That one. ठीक.
Yeah.
ठीक है. Very good. Something because I didn't bring my hearing aids. ठीक.
But you can.
The previous lecture is going on.
Okay.
I'm the last speaker, no?
Mm-hmm. But why can't you hear
It's
it?
not the speaker, it's what?
Department of Philosophy and Religion. I think that person is over 4 o'clock. Now maybe.
It's still the previous meeting, but why is there no
1
sound?
minute, 1 minute.
No, still not come.
Right, so some. Somebody to pin you, na? To enable you to speak.
No voice, it says.
Where?
Oh,
No, that's Absalom.
that's the other guy.
When they focus on you, I think maybe they will put on the speaker.
Yeah, okay.
That you can, that somebody is speaking, na? That is the screen is for that person speak.
This is good. I like this.
Achha. Do you have that Rahul's number? The person who sent you the
No,
link?
not phone number.
No,
I'll send him an email.
No, I took the message from your email only because the email also got opened. You can send him a message. Kindly unmute speaker. Telling you? No.
No, it wouldn't have gone because I'm not getting the Wi-Fi. Chandra Singh one, oh yeah, I'll do it from my iPhone.
No, you can send us in 1 or 2. Where is your phone?
It's come from this phone. Okay, so now it would go.
Maybe I tested it yesterday with the other office. It's working perfectly okay.
See?
Acha, one more person is gone. Do you want the speaker here?
Mm-hmm. I think I can wait. I'll wait here.
No, it's okay. Did he reply?
There's still the other meeting going on.
Maybe 4:30? They are sticking to the original plan.
So he's written back to say, can you hear now? Say no. I'll say no.
You can also do a chat in the
Mhm.
that person. I see that person, that Rahul.
That's Rahul.
Huh.
Oh, okay, it's getting over now.
Oh, he's already
He said, he wrote to me.
Ah.
What is he saying?
No, I think somebody's already speaking.
Sir, we're going to begin the valedictory program now. It'll take 20 minutes to do some ritual things. That means that your address will begin at 4:40. And so, ठीक है.
On the topic, the pragmatism and ontology of memes, cultural tools turning into digital beings. And the second by Dr. Manas Jyoti Deka, University of Allahabad, on the topic, lure of the self, reflection on Nag Arjun, Freud, and Lacan. On the day two, we had again 3 academic sessions. First was chaired by Professor Nilanjan Das, University of Toronto, and convened by Dr. Upendra Kumar, Assistant Professor BHU. The first paper was presented by Dr. Saurabh Todaria from IIIT Hyderabad on the topic Overcoming Metaphysics, Technology and Thinking in Rorty and Heidegger. Second by Dr. Rahul Kumar Maurya from BHU on the topic deontologizing ethics, Sorry for that mistake, sir. The interface between pragmatism and Buddhism. Third, by Dr. Sushrut Ravish from IIT Kanpur on the topic Pragmatist Reflective Equilibrium. Again, in the next academic session, the three papers were presented. First, by Dr. Alok Tandon, an independent scholar, on the topic Ambedkar's Deviant Reconstruction of Buddhism, Some Reflections. Second, by Professor Pradeep Gokhale from Pune University on the topic Pragmatic Elements in Classical Buddhism. And third, by Professor Ajay Verma from JNU on the topic Examination of Buddhist View of Mental States from Perspective of Two-Truth Theory. The sixth academic session for the conference was chaired by Professor Anand Mishra, professor and former head of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, BHU, and it was convened by Dr. R.L. Behera, Assistant Professor, BHU. Four papers were presented in this session. First, by Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singh, DU, on the topic Being, Emptiness, and the Handing Over Chiron, a methodological study of pragmatism and ontological hermeneutics in Heidegger, Rorty, and Buddhism. Second paper was presented by Dr. Viplav Winkar from Birla College, Mumbai, on the topic From Fetish to Liberation, Zizek's Critique and the Transformative Potential of Ambedkar's Neo-Buddhism. Third paper was presented by Dr. Mansi Vash, Manipal University, on the topic Some Reflections on Rorty's Pragmatic Understanding of Philosophy. Fourth paper was presented by Dr. Neeti Singh, Assistant Professor in BHU, on the topic The Role of Reasons and Epistemological Inquiry into Dharmakirti's Nyaya Bindu and Dharmottara's Tika. This paper, and on day 2 of this last academic session for that day, it was chaired by Professor Rakesh Kumar Jha, Professor BHU, and it was convened by Dr. Neeti Singh. Two papers were presented at this session. First, by Professor Sri Kala M. Nair, Kaladi University, on the topic Coping with the World, Does Buddhism Favor a Pragmatic Theory of Truth? And the second was presented by Dr. Sonam Kachru, Yale University, UK, on the topic Buddhist Pragmatisms. On the last day of the conference, the first academic session for today was chaired by Professor Pradeep Gokhale from Pune University, and it was convened by Dr. Pramod Kumar Bagre. The three papers were presented in this session. First, by Professor Nilanjan Das from University of Toronto on the topic Epistemology Depragmatized, Bhasar Vajnus on PVA and PV 2. Second paper was presented by Professor Rakesh Chandra, University of Lucknow, on the topic Some Reflections on Some Readings of Richard Rorty, Piranism and Nagarjuna. Third was presented by Professor Inakshi Mitra on the topic Finding Pragmatic Strains in Buddhist Semantics and Logic in the Backdrop of Peirce's Thoughts. In the next session for today, it was chaired by Professor Inakshi Mitra, and it was convened by Dr. Kalpana Yadav, ma'am. The first paper was presented by Dr. Sri Nahata, University of Oxford, on the topic Epistemological Pragmatism in Our Conventional World. And second paper was presented by Dr. Rajan from University of Allahabad on the topic Two Philosophies of Coping with the World, a comparative study of Neo-Pragmatism and Mahayana Buddhism. Next paper was presented by Dr. Surendra Ghimre from Tribhuvan University, Nepal, on the topic Pragmatic Nature of Buddhism. Next session was chaired by Professor Ajay Verma and convened by Dr. R.L. Behera, Assistant Professor, BHU. Again, three papers were presented in this session. First, by Dr. Amir Riaz from AMU on the topic Exploring the Commonalities Between Buddhism and Islam. Second, by Dr. Baleshwar Prasad Yadav, BHU, on the topic Advocating the Buddhist and Pragmatist Rationale. And third, by Dr. Upendra Kumar, BHU, on the topic Inquiry into Buddhist Brahma Vihar and Pragmatist Notion of Truth. Parallel sessions were also conducted in the H.N. Tripathi Hall, where research scholars presented their papers. The first session was chaired by Professor Rakesh Chandra, and second session was chaired by Professor Pradeep Gokhale. Now, the valedictory session will be delivered by Professor Akil Bilgrami, and this report was presented by me, Soumya Bajpayee, and it was co-written by my two colleagues, Rajiba Lochan Tripathi and Priya Balian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soumya. Before I invite our valedictory speaker, Professor Bilgrami, I would like to present a brief bio note of Professor Bilgrami. So, Professor Akil Bilgrami is a professor of philosophy at Columbia University. He has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago. He is the author of the following books: Belief and Meaning, Self-Knowledge and Resentment, Secularism, Capital, Culture and the Commons. He is currently writing a book on Gandhi's philosophy as well as a longer work on the nature of practical reason. Professor Bilgrami teaches regular courses and seminars on various subjects, including the philosophy of language and mind, politics and rationality, religion and politics, cultural identity and modernity, and Gandhi's thought. So, he is the president of the trustees and the executive editor of the Journal of Philosophy. So now I request Professor Bilgrami, sir, to deliver his valedictory address. Over to you, sir. Sir.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
Am I audible? All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I'm very sorry not to be there. I've gone and broken my right arm, a bone in my right arm, so I wasn't able to travel. I'm very sorry to have missed these proceedings. But here I am, and when Ram asked me to speak in broad terms of the ways in which elements of pragmatist philosophy have made a difference. I'm getting some kind of disturbance. Is there okay. I thought what I'd do is put down some reflections. Alas, I can't write it down, but I thought I'd present a few reflections on the slogan, which is so central to pragmatism, which is the primacy of practice. Actually, it's a slogan that is quite widespread and is found in doctrines quite outside of pragmatism, such as Marxism. But pragmatism is a good place for me to begin on these reflections, which are on the borderline of pragmatist. I'm not myself a pragmatist, but I have a sense of affinity with pragmatism because I think in some sense the idea that practice is primary has been very important in my own work. So a good state-setting place to begin on these reflections is to focus on the fact that practice is intended by pragmatism to be cognitive practice when it deploys the slogan, the primacy of practice. So its focus is the primacy of practice in cognitive sense. And the chief way in which this focuses, at any rate, the most sober way in which this focuses in pragmatism, is in the work of Charles Sanders Peirce in his remarkable paper in epistemology, The Fixation of Belief. I think one of the two or three great contributions in the last century to epistemology. Quine's The Dogmas of Empiricism, and before that, Peirce's Fixation of Belief, I think are two remarkable, influential contributions. And in it, Peirce deploys the idea of practice as, in some sense, being on center stage by stressing the fact that you can't ask about the nature of knowledge without making central the notion of inquiry into knowledge. That is, the practice of inquiry into knowledge becomes central to understanding the nature of knowledge. So inquiry is key to understanding knowledge, and that's, in a sense, to make the practice primary. And the way this surfaces in Peirce is that it dismisses a whole range of skepticisms that go back to Descartes, but in a sense go back, of course, to ancient skepticism as well. It repudiates Cartesian doubt most explicitly by finding that kind of doubt idle because it makes no difference to the practice of inquiry. That's the chief idea in Peirce's paper. The idea is you're committed to the primacy of practice because you have a general understanding that if something doesn't make a difference to practice, in this case cognitive practice, it makes no difference to knowledge. Makes no difference to, if it doesn't make a difference to inquiry, it makes no difference to epistemology generally. And his claim is that the kind of fallibilist doubt that Cartesian epistemology makes central is idle because it makes no difference to inquiry. And one way of bringing this out is by stressing what is sometimes called the preface paradox, the paradox of the preface. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to present it as a paradox, but the idea is perfectly straightforward. When people write prefaces, they say things like, something or the other in the next 400 pages that I've written is bound to be false. And then they usually say, please don't blame those nice people who helped me write this book. But the idea is they make a kind of admission that it's quite possible that what follows in this book, it's very likely that something or the other in it is false. Now, that kind of expression of doubt, according to Peirce, is completely idle because it doesn't tell the author of the book what she might do to improve the book. If you just have the view that something's bound to be false in what follows, you're given no instruction about what exactly you might do to improve it. And so Peirce thinks that kind of doubt is idle. And he thinks that Cartesian doubt is like that, because it makes the claim that anything we might think could be false. Or, given any belief that we have to have some grounds for thinking that it's not in a dream or something, and otherwise it's susceptible to doubt. And And Peirce thinks that kind of doubt has nothing to offer the idea of the practice of inquiry, and so there is no reason to make it central as Descartes does in epistemology. So what really Peirce is doing here is taking the idea of the primacy of practice and building on it a whole way of doing epistemology that is an alternative to the influence that Descartes had on epistemology. And his way of presenting a way of eliminating this kind of doubt is to claim that we have two kinds of states that are in play in inquiry. One is belief, and remember now, when he says that these are in play, what he means is that you're looking at everything from the inquirer's point of view. Even if the inquirer is a collective one, when we inquire, as he says, the point is it's the point of view of the inquirer that's central. And he says, from the point of view of the inquirer, there are two kinds of states. One is the inquirer's beliefs, and the other is the inquirer's hypotheses or conjectures. And those are the two states that are on center stage in pragmatist epistemology, as Peirce understood it. And beliefs, from the point of view of the inquirer, are simply true. So remember, he's not talking about beliefs in any other sense, but beliefs from the point of view of the inquirer. And from the point of view of the inquirer, beliefs are simply true. And being true, they provide the standards by which one assesses the other kinds of state in inquiry, which are hypotheses or conjectures. They simply provide the standards for assessing a hypothesis, and if it meets the standards that are present in one's beliefs, then the hypothesis is confirmed and it becomes part of one's set of beliefs. If the hypothesis doesn't meet the standards that one's beliefs provide, then the hypothesis is rejected, and some alternative hypotheses are then considered. So, given this view, which stresses inquiry, beliefs are simply taken for granted. They're in the background. They're taken for granted as true, and they provide the lights by which the other kinds of state in inquiry, such as beliefs and conjectures, are assessed for truth. So what's very important here is that this provides the background, and the notion of a background is something that I want to exploit in exploring my own understanding of the primacy of practice. But what I want to stress here is that this view doesn't allow Cartesian doubt to get off the ground, because Cartesian doubt has no idea of a background of truths. Because for Cartesian doubt, all the beliefs are in the foreground and they're going to be assessed for truth. All of the beliefs are in the foreground and they're being assessed for truth. And Peirce, in Peirce's epistemology, that's simply not the case. You can never assess all of one's beliefs for truth because the standards by which you assess them are there in the background. So you can't push everything into the foreground. The notion of a background is playing a major role in the epistemology. And for Descartes, everything is in the foreground, and is to be assessed, doubted or confirmed. And if everything is in the background, Peirce's view is, where are you standing? And how are you going to assess them? And Descartes, of course, had this idea that some idea of clearness and distinctness, clarity and distinctness, which is supposed to be intuitively available to everyone. And Peirce has no idea what clarity and distinctness means. It's just for him, just too intuitive and unphilosophical claim. So the only thing that can provide the grounds for assessment is the background of true beliefs, true from the inquirer's point of view, but there is no other point of view for Peirce. So that's simply truth. And so you have to take some things to be true in the background. So you can't assess everything all at once. You just can't assess everything all at once as you can in Descartes, because the standards for assessment are one's beliefs. So it preempts Cartesian doubt from even so much as arising. It doesn't answer Cartesian doubt, it preempts it, because it's just a different model of epistemology, a different model that comes because of the stress on the primacy of practice, of inquiry, and how it proceeds. Okay, now I've stressed the background in Peirce because I think that there is this notion of a background is extended some decades later by Wittgenstein in a very fascinating way to extend in turn the idea of the primacy of practice. And I want to spell that out in these initial reflections on what I take to be broadly pragmatist commitment in primacy of practice. First, you see, the background.
फर्स्ट का हम ज्वाइन किए हुए हैं अभी चल रहा है कॉन्फ्रेंस
Will you please tell this gentleman to put off his... So now, in Peirce, the background is nothing but fully cognitive states, beliefs. The background is entirely discursive, propositional, cognitive states. Wittgenstein deploys a similar idea of a background, except that it's not fully discussed. It consists of all kinds of states that can be non-propositional. There can be what he calls practices. So he's extending the notion of practice now. And all this is to be found, this extension of a background, the ideal of a background, the methodological ideal of a background, is to be found in Wittgenstein's expression, forms of life. Now, this is a very loosely, in Wittgenstein, there's very little plain statement. There's a lot of nudging and winking about what he has in mind. But here, I think, is the idea that has influenced me, and I think it's very important to understand its proper place in Wittgenstein. And I would like to say, reflect a little bit on the way in which I think the right way to see how he deploys it and see what primacy of practice means for him. In looking at his profound discussion of rules and rule following. And I think that I really think a careful reading of Wittgenstein requires us to read it in the following terms. To understand the nature of meaning or rules, rules of meaning, rules of use, as he puts it. Let me try and expound it by looking at a rule, which is his example, to bring out what he intends by the notion of rules and meaning, or intentionality at any rate, which is, I think, the place where his discussion of rule following is most profoundly insightful. So Wittgenstein argues that the notion of rules and meaning are normative. This is something, for instance, that Kripke's beautifully clear exposition of Wittgenstein brings out. That norms, meanings are normative, rules are normative phenomena, and the example that Wittgenstein makes the focus of his discussion is the example of a signpost. So, of course, he has the example of the arithmetical example, which is raised to present what Kripke calls skeptical doubt. Of course, that's a very controversial reading of Wittgenstein. But Wittgenstein presents the essential problem before he raises this rule-following example, whether you see it as a skeptical issue or not, is this idea of is the example of a signpost. So Wittgenstein asks, how come when we, say, English speakers he's talking about a group which takes for granted that if you see an arrow pointing in a certain direction, you see it as turning left. There's no interpretation, he says. It's not a matter of seeing it and stopping and saying, well, how shall I interpret it? He says, that's not what happens in the particular group, the particular community in which one sees an arrow, one just turns left. That's what, if we see an arrow pointing in a certain direction. We don't stop and interpret it. We just see it as telling us to turn left. We see it as making a normative demand on us, turn left. That is to say, we literally see meaning. We see the normative directiveness in seeing the arrow. So what really Wittgenstein is doing is rejecting the idea that what we see is a physical sign, let's say on a wooden board. We do not see a physical sign on a wooden board. We simply bypass that kind of seeing if we belong to the group. Rather, we directly see meaning in what we see. We see the directive turn left, the normative directive, turn left. We don't stop and say, here's a wooden board, here's a physical mark on it, how should I interpret it? You scratch your head, and then as an interpretative achievement, you say, aha, I interpret it as turning left. He says, that's all wrong. That's not what happens if you belong to this group. If you belong to this group, you simply see it as turning left. You don't first see something physical and then interpret it. You just see the meaning directly. So the question he's asking is, what makes for this rich perception? What accounts for this phenomenological sensitivity to meaning quite directly? Not going through a phenomenology of perception of something physical with an interpretation added. What makes for this direct phenomenology of the perception of meaning, or normative directives, rules, in this case a traffic rule? And Wittgenstein's answer is, in the group which sees it, there's a background of practices, social history, collective memory. Not all of it is by any means propositional and discursive. Right? So for him, he calls that forms of life. There's a whole background of things that we encounter in one's upbringing, in one's tradition, in one's acculturation into the community, which sees the Zionists turning left, as directly as telling us to turn left. So he says, in that group, so we can make up a story. Like we could say, well, in this group, they grew up with comic books and movies and direct experience of certain martial arts in which bows and arrows were used, and the arrow had a certain direction of flight, and the head of the arrow went in a certain direction. And given this culture in which there was such martial arts as shooting arrows, we got acculturated through books, films, comics, and so on and so forth, into simply seeing the arrow as telling us to turn left. If one hadn't got this form of life, if one were from a totally different group, a totally different culture, let's make up a story of some different culture where bows and arrows were not used for martial weaponry, and instead arrows were, let's say, a form of decoration. And then add some details, then it might well be for that group, which is not our group, not our community, arrows had a completely different, they enabled a completely different kind of rich perception. Maybe the head of the arrow was the starting point, and the other end of the arrow was the intended designation. So it all depends on what the form of life is. If you belong to, so let's say the form of life is one where there was martial arts, bows and arrows was used for shooting in certain directions, you would see the saying turning left. If there was another form of life, you might not see it that way at all, you might see the opposite, and so on. So that's the idea. The idea is it expands the notion of background that you found in Peirce. In Peirce, it's propositions, beliefs, which provide the background by which you do all the epistemological inquiry into the truth and infirmity of hypotheses. And Wittgenstein takes that idea of a background, expands it to contain elements that are not necessarily propositional, not just beliefs, but social history, collective memory, books, comics, just cultural practices. And so you get a very rich notion of the idea of practice, of practices, which is this very rich idea of a form of life, and it makes possible the perception of meanings, rules, norms, directly, which are in the foreground. Only a background of this kind of practices makes possible meanings and rules and normative to just simply directly apprehend in the foreground. Now, I just wanted to, while reflecting on this, I just wanted to register why I think there is a profound issue here on which Wittgenstein is taking a stand, which I believe is deeply right, about the relationship between the social and the individual, the community and the individual. And that is that, you see, Kripke, in his wonderful work, which raises this issue of rule following in a very clear and revealing, illuminating way, presents it as a skeptical problem. And he offers a skeptical solution to what he calls the rule following puzzle, in which he takes a very distinct view of the relationship between community or the social and rule following. And one way to bring out Kripke's view, it's also Crispin Wright's view, that Crispin Wright situates it in a somewhat sophisticated and complex form of anti-realism. Kripke is an anti-realist because, after all, it's a skeptical solution and gives up the notion of truth conditions for assertability conditions and so on. But Wittgenstein, Crispin Wright presses this in certain anti-realist directions that have a very sophisticated and complex texture, layered view. But basically, both of them take a certain view, which I don't really believe is Wittgenstein's view. And that's why I think stressing practices and the primacy of practice has to be properly situated. So the way they stress the social and the social practices can be brought out as follows. I mean, I think this is one way to bring it out. Suppose somebody in our group unlike the rest of us in our group, doesn't see the arrow as immediately telling us to turn left. He's in our group, but he doesn't do automatically what we do. Doesn't see it the way we see it. He lacks the phenomenological sensitivity we have. What happens now? I think if you put the problem this way, what if somebody in our group, not somebody from another culture with a different form of life, with a different set of practices and a background, but what if somebody in our group, with our background and our set of practices, etc., our social history, etc., with the martial arts background of the use of bows and arrows, what if he doesn't see it as we see it? Now, one thing one could say, and sometimes Wittgenstein's rhetoric, I can see, leads to the kind of interpretation that Kripke and Crispin Wright pick up on, which is one. Sometimes Wittgenstein seems to suggest, well, there's nothing to do. There's a sort of bedrock, and you have to tell this person, this is how we do it. Right? You just declare that the rule is constituted by our practices, and you just say, look, this is the rule. This is how we do it. Right? The norm is set by us. And I think that leads to the way Kripke and Wright read the notion of the importance of the social of the set of practices for the rule. This is how we do it. But you see, that leaves out the background, because it takes what I'm suggesting is the role of the social and of the practices, which is a background role, and it brings it into the foreground and says, this is how we do it. To say this is how we do it as an explicit as an explicit assertion, this is how we do it, is to say that the rules are constituted by the social. And that's the skeptical solution in Kripke. That's Wright's view as well. I'm saying that's not the role of the social. The role of the social cannot be brought into the foreground. The role of the social is always in the background. And I think that is really what Wittgenstein intends. And so, if that is right, then you can never make explicit and bring into the foreground that social role, that set of practices. The primacy of practice is a background primacy. And so it's really important. So if you take my reading of Wittgenstein, that it's necessarily in the background. This is very often. This is one could say that this is a reading that links him with Heidegger, because Heidegger made a big thing of the notion of background. But it's not a direction I want to go, because it's not obvious to me that there are problems in the way Heidegger presents this, and my hold on Heidegger isn't a scholarly one. But I think what I'm keen to say is that one should never say, this is how we do it. That is to make the social have a constitutive role in the wrong sense, in the foreground. So what, according to my reading of it, what does one tell this recalcitrant person in our group who fails to see things as we do? I think the only thing one can do is to point to other things in the background to help him out. Never say it explicitly in the foreground, this is just how we do it. But rather, maybe, I'm making up this example again. So maybe you said you point to a boat and point out that the boat has a certain similarity of shape to an arrow. The pointed end is at one end, the flat end is at the other end, and it goes forward with the pointed end. Point out it's like the arrow, the direction is the same, and until the person gets it. Right? So you appeal to things in the background through analogies of this kind, through similarities of shape, etc. Things which are, you never discursively, propositionally make the assertion, this is how we do it. You gesture at other things in the background till the person gets it. And so I think the role of the social, the role of practices, right, the sense in which practice is primary is always that it's presupposed in the background, and you have to appeal to things in the background or stress things in the background in order to account for what is normative in the foreground. You can't bring it in the foreground itself. You lose the essentially Wittgensteinian idea of what forms of life are if you don't see them as background forms of life, making possible foreground rules, norms, meanings, etc. And that is the sense in which he understands the primacy of practice. Okay, so those are so what I've tried to do in these broad reflections is to present to you how pragmatism's idea, the primacy of practice, as is found in Peirce, I think is by far the most sober and insightful. James takes it in one direction, Dewey takes it in the idea of primacy of practice in another direction. I think Peirce gets the epistemology most profoundly right, and I wanted to present to you Wittgenstein's extension of Peirce's idea of the primacy of practice along a more ambitious direction, because the focus is not just on inquiry into truth and knowledge, but into the very idea of intentionality, normativity, rules, etc. Okay, I want to turn now to another area of the primacy of practice, which has had a major influence on my work, and this departs from, well, it doesn't depart from pragmatism, but you might say it extends the idea, the central idea of the importance of practice, the centrality of practice in another direction, which is a very profound direction. And before I get to that, maybe I should say one last thing about Wittgenstein, which I feel, at least in my incipient thinking on this subject, why it is important to read Wittgenstein the way I do, rather than the way Wright and Kripke do, because I think it is quite apart from philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, coming to grips with the notion of meaning and intentionality. I think the reason why it's important to do it has actually larger implications, or wider implications. See, I think it's really important to get here to get this abstract sense of things clear, which is to understand it along this reading of Wittgenstein rather than Kripke's, is important because the relationship between the social and the individual, and the way in which the social is constitutive of the individual, it is very important to understand because it has political implications, or wider implications at any rate, implications in social philosophy, not just philosophy of language and mind. This has to do with the fact that what Wittgenstein is keen on is to understand meaning, and his ambition in trying to understand meaning is really to understand the nature of rationality and normativity, rationality, and I think here is one way to bring it out. What makes us as individuals possess reason in a way that we've come to stress and present in an articulated doctrinal form ever since, say, the political enlightenment, is that we think that reason comes when we are able to say of something that seems to constitute us, or to be essential to our natures in some way, when we can step back from it and raise questions about it. So something that comes naturally to us, we can step back from and ask, ought I to, should I do what is natural? So you find in Kant's profound discussions of autonomy, individual autonomy, the way he formulates it is to say that we can ask of our inclinations, ought I to do what I'm inclined to do? So when Kant stresses that human beings have autonomy, The contrast he makes is with inclinations, which are heteronomous. Our inclinations just dispose us to do things. And Kant's idea of individual autonomy is to say we can ask of our inclinations, of our tendencies of behavior that are given to us by our natures. We can ask of them, ought I to be doing what my inclinations are inclining me to do? And I think it's clear that what the political enlightenment picked up on is that what Kant said about being able to step back and ask questions about, which is our form of the onset of human reason or rationality, is something that we can ask of our social acculturation. So, for instance, my mother would constantly try to acculturate me into certain forms of normative forms, moral behavior, would often say, Achille, don't do that. Bilgramis don't do that. That was her way of acculturating me into certain moral behavior and social behavior, moral behavior. So we, in that sense, as long ago as Aristotle, it was said we are social creatures, and this is very widely accepted by any social philosopher. And what Kant's notion of autonomy brings out is just what I began to ask with the onset of reason. Can't remember what age it must have been, but with the onset of reason, I was able to step back and say, damn it, should I be doing what the Bilgramis are doing? Or should I be thinking as the Bilgramis are thinking? Because I was constantly being told, don't do that, or Bilgramis don't do that. And at some point, I got irritated and began to ask, well, what I be doing, what the Bilgramis are doing. And I think this is Kant's idea of reason and how reason makes us autonomous, is that one is able to ask of one's social acculturation, ought I to be doing what the pack is doing? What makes us different from wolves is that wolves can't ask that question. Right? That's, I think, Kant's point. Kant's point is what makes us special in a sense that is simply not invidious. So there's no anthropomorphism. Because we really can do this in a way that wolves can't. So we're not pack animals. And we can ask, should I be doing what the group is doing, the community, what the pack is doing? And that's the onset of reason, because the question really is, do I have reason to do what the pack or the group or the family or whatever it is doing? It's the first sign of our reason that we can ask that, and the exercise of our reason when we do ask that. And I think that's the sense in which we shouldn't be ever told this is how we do it, because we have to respect the autonomy part, which is that we can ask of it, should I be doing that way? And you don't have that possibility if you simply thump down on the table, the bedrock, this is how we do it. You can't leave out the place of autonomous reason. Now, having said that, I'm not going to get into what is a further profound development which comes with Hegel, which is that even if you can ask that, Hegel points out something that is as I said, a profound addition to to Kant's notion of autonomy, which is not something that Kant makes central. Hegel points out that when you ask, should I be doing, ought I to be doing, when you exercise your individual reason by asking that in a way that wolves can't, Hegel points out that any answer you give to that question of individual, which is a reflection of your individual autonomy, any answer you give to it is going to be coming from your social acculturation. It's not going to come from some transcendent point of view. It can only come from other parts of your social acculturation. And if that's right, we have to understand the relationship between the individual and the social as precisely the fact that you can raise this question, and by stepping out of your social embedding, but then to answer the question, you have to look at some other place in your social embedding to answer it. So it isn't as if you've gone off to some other social stratosphere. You're still in your social embedding, but you stand in one place to raise questions about it and answer from another place. And that is something, I think you find, for instance, that the image of Neurath's mariner in a boat and so on are an essential part of how you understand the relationship between the individual and the social. You're in the boat, you're never outside somewhere, otherwise you'll drown, and you fix the boat from somewhere else. And that's the idea, I think, that Hegel adds to Kant when he talks about how the social comes in. And I think keeping that balance between individual autonomy and the social is a very deep implication of how Wittgenstein understands it, and as opposed to how I think the direction which Kripke's understanding of Wittgenstein's remarks leads us to. Okay, how much time do I have? I was very keen to present some other things that have influenced my work a lot in the stress on the primacy of practice. Do I have another 20 minutes or so, Rahul? Can somebody just answer this quick question I have?
Hello.
Hi, Rahul, do I have about 20 minutes?
I think you can take 10 to 15 minutes if you.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Okay, so let me quickly tell you one other place where the primacy of practice, I think, has been very sort of a mobilizing idea, and that is, you find it, for instance, in Strawson's stress on the participant stance in his very innovative essay, Freedom and Resentment, where he takes the subject of freedom away from a sort of pure metaphysics and makes it into a norm-based metaphysics, when he says that agency is to be understood in terms of freedom, is to be understood in terms of the practices of responsibility. And it's not a matter of just looking at questions of causality and determinism through the lens of the universal sway of causality, which gave rise to the metaphysical issues of freedom versus determinism. Strawson thinks that if you stress something that he calls the participant's stance, that is his way of stressing the primacy of practice, you're led to change the subject of freedom, and freedom becomes a matter of looking at the practices of responsibility, such as blame, resentment, punishment, and so on. Well, I found this, it has mobilized my thinking in ways that have been for me very fruitful. And I wanted to give you a quick argument for one direction which this way of thinking of the primacy of practice. I believe if you understand this, you understand a certain essential connection, which is inherent, intrinsic connection, between the notion of value, moral value, and agency. And if you understand that correctly, you cannot fail to believe in value realism. That is, that values, moral values, let's say, are real properties in the world. Real properties in the world we inhabit. So not just the idea that we have values somewhere in our mentality or moral sentiments, which is the view of human Adam Smith, but rather values are properties in the world. And we, our desires, our moral sentiments, are responses to the perception of value in the world we inhabit. That's moral realism. And I think this follows if you think of value as essentially linked to practical agency. So let me bring this out. And this is something I came to. This argument is something I presented in my work, which I'll present to you briefly, just to stress why the primacy of practice can be so fruitful, that it can lead to understanding value as real properties in the world, moral realism, if you believe that, if you believe in the primacy of practice. So here's a quick presentation of the argument I've given, and I'll present it and I'll rest there in these pragmatist reflections on the primacy of practice. Take Strawson's distinction between the objective stance and the participant stance. We take an objective stance on ourselves very often, and we take a participant stance on ourselves very often. When we take an objective stance on ourselves, we might say or think things like, I predict that I will do something. If I predict that I will do something, I'm looking at myself objectively, as I might be looking at an eclipse. I look at my behavioral tendencies and I predict that I will do something on that basis. But when I take a participant stance on myself, I don't think thoughts like I predict that I will, but thoughts like I intend that I will do something. So I intend that I will do something is the participant stance on oneself, participant, the first person point of view on oneself, and the objective or detached, disengaged point of view on oneself is to say, I predict that I will do something. But I might as well be talking about somebody else, or indeed physical phenomena, a purely causal understanding of things. And Strawson wants to argue that if you only had an objective stance on yourself, you would lack practical agency. You would have theoretical agency because you have to be a theoretical agent in order to say, I predict that I will do something. The first I in I predict that I will do something is the I of an agent. Right? After all, it's making the prediction. But the second I is not the I of agency. The second I is just a passive object, right? Because the first I's angle on it is detached, it's disengaged. Might as well be talking about an eclipse when I talk about myself. So So Strawson wants to say, if you only had that perspective on yourself, the detached, disengaged point of view on yourself, you would not be an agent in the practical sense. You would best be an agent in what Kant calls the speculative sense, theoretical agents. You'd see yourself as an object of, let us say, in its most regimented form, natural science. In its most regimented form, natural science. So unless you had a participant's angle on yourself, the first-person point of view, where you say things like, I intend that I will, if you only had a predictive stance on yourself, you wouldn't be a practical agent. Okay, now, suppose we extend that and say, all right, that's to take, see the two perspectives, engaged and disengaged, agentive and disengaged, on oneself. But being perspectives of this kind is a general thing. And we can also have these two perspectives on the world, not just on ourselves. So I can have an engaged perspective on the world, the counterpart to I intend that I will, etc., where you have an engaged perspective on yourself, and a detached perspective on oneself. A detached perspective on the world, right? Where you predict that I will, you also predict what will occur in the world, let's say. So if you have two different perspectives on the world, matching the two distinct perspectives we have on ourselves, when we say, I intend that I will, and I predict that I will, that distinction between perspectives should equally apply to our perspectives on the world. And of course, when we have the disengaged perspective on the world, we can have it in informal ways, but the most regimented and formalized way of having a disengaged perspective on the world is what we do when we do natural science. Right? So then the question arises, what happens when we have an engaged perspective on the world? If we have a disengaged perspective on the world, we see the world, let's say, in the most regimented way of having a disengaged perspective on the world, we see the world as containing the properties that natural science posits as what the world contains. But what would it be to see the world in the engaged form, from the engaged perspective? And a very natural answer to give. I've given you no argument, I'm just telling you what's natural. A very natural answer to give is that we see the world as containing properties, value properties is one perfectly good word for them, which make normative demands on us, which prompt our practical agency. Not just the agency which explains in a disengaged way, which predicts in a disengaged way, but a practical agency, because we see the world containing properties that prompt us normatively to respond with our practical agency. And that's value properties in the world. So it's very natural to extend the distinction of which I presented as two perspectives on ourselves, I intend that I will, I predict that I will, to two perspectives on the world. One perspective, which is in its most regimented form, the perspective of natural scientists' perspective on the world, disengaged, making predictions, explanations. The other, responding to value properties in the world. Now, I think what I've just said is that it's very natural to do that. It seems as if it's a strain. There's no strain in saying that if the world contains the properties of natural science, it also must contain these other properties if you're going to be engaging in the world in a practical sense. But of course, to say that it's natural is not really yet to give any philosophical argument. And I think one way to do better and try and argue philosophically for this moral realism, which claims that there are properties, value properties in the world that make normative demands on our practical engagement, is to raise a challenge for what seems natural, which is that the world contains properties. And that challenge would be a standard challenge that Humeans need to give. Philosophers like Simon Blackburn, well, a whole range of Humeans. And they are bound to say, no, when you have practical agency, you're not responding to value properties in the world that prompt your practical agency. Rather, you're simply acting on your desires. Practical agency is not a response to properties in the world that demand the exercise of your practical agency. Practical agency comes from nothing but states of mind inside us, right, which is our desires and moral sentiments. That's human Adam Smith. And they just simply prompt us to act, to fulfill those desires and moral sentiments. And that's all that agency is. So the challenge is, practical agency is acting on our desires and moral sentiments. And we refuse what you're saying, what I'm saying. So the challenge is, we refuse what Bilgram is saying, that practical agency is a response to something much more complicated, which is the world contains something which demands your practical agency to be exercised as a response to it. Right? So no. So the challenge is, you have desires, you act on them, that's it. That's what practical agency is. And the challenge is, why are you complicating things and saying your desires are not just prompting your agency, but your desires are responses to desirabilities or values, value properties in the world. So that you claim the desires are responses to desirabilities or value properties in the world, and that makes for agency, whereas the simpler view is desires prompt agency. That's it. It's a way of denying. And I think that view can't be right, because that view which says desires are self-standing, they're not responses to anything in the world, i.e. desirabilities or values. They're just self-standing and they prompt action, practical agency. I think that view can't be right for the following reason.
Professor Akhil Birgami, I am Gopal Guru.
Yes.
My name is Gopal Guru.
Yes, Gopal, how are you?
I'm fine. I have been asked by the organizers
Tika.
to conclude your valedictory speech in some. Well, I'm enjoying myself, but in the interest of the organizers, I should really request you to please conclude it. Yes. By the way, I'm also chairing this valedictory session. Okay.
So do you want me to just stop now, or do you
No, you can make final points and that's it.
Okay. All right. So let me try and answer this challenge. Think of it this way. Gareth Evans, in a wonderful discussion, raises a question. He points out that when we are asked what we believe, so suppose someone asks you, do you believe it's raining outside? This is Gareth Evans's example. Do you believe it's raining outside? Evans says, we don't scan our minds to see if we have the belief. We look outside. So Evans says, isn't it interesting that whether you're asked, is it raining outside? a question about the world, or whether you're asked, do you believe it's raining outside? You look at the world. You look at the world if you're asked, is it raining outside? You look at the world if you're asked, do you believe it's raining outside? You don't say, let me see. Do I have the belief that it's raining outside? You don't scan your interior. You look at the world even then. So you do the same thing, look at the world, whether you're asked about the world or your mind. And I think exactly the same is true of desires. If you're asked, do you desire something? You don't say, let me see. At least in the paradigm case, in the natural case, in some special circumstances, look at yourself, maybe in a psychoanalyst couch. But by and large, if you're asked, do you desire X? You consider X. You don't consider what's in your mind, whether you have the desire or not. You consider the desirability of X. So you answer the question, do you desire X? Not by looking at your mind to see if it has the desire, but whether you have X. And now think of it this way. Suppose you were to not do that. Suppose every time you were asked you desire X, you look inside your mind rather than at X, the desirability of X. If you were always to look into your mind, then you would always see your desires would be given to you always as the object of a gaze, of your internal gaze. And that would be to completely kill, to deaden the motivational power of your desires. If your desires were present to you, available to you, given to you, always as the object of an internal gaze, do I desire it or not? Yes, I desire it. You reporting something about your mind, they would be the object of an internal gaze, and they would have no motivational power. They'd be just what Sartre calls the object of your own gaze, internal gaze of yourself. So the only way in which your desires have practical power for motivating you to act is if your desires are not given to you as the object of your own gaze, but your desires are given to you indirectly through the perception of desirabilities in the world. It's only when your desires are given to you through desirabilities in the world, that your desires have the motivational power they do as practical agentive states of mind. Otherwise, they're the object of a gaze, and they lose their practical agentive motivational power. And I think that's an extremely important ground for thinking that you can't have desires and moral sentiments unless you have desirabilities and values in the world, because you wouldn't be agents at all in the practical sense if that were not so. So the primacy of practical agency ensures or requires value properties as distinct properties in the world. Okay, so that's I think a very, very significant implication of the importance of the primacy of practice or practical agency. Okay,
Thank you very much. Professor Bill Gramy, thank you very much for your very, very enticing, thought-provoking, taking us into a very constructive direction of doing research and do some reflective thinking. I'm not in a position to summarize what you have said. It is such a complex presentation you have made. But I got some points where I think we would have really liked you to be on the same ground discussing face to face. But now we are in the background, you are on the digital. So taking your analogy ahead, foreground and the background. You are in the foreground, we are in the background. So thank you so much. I think it was really very important address you delivered as the valedictory. Uh, uh, what is that? What do you say? Valedictory finishing point? Yeah, I would like to s- s- summarize, if not summarize, but repeat according to my own grasping power of his very complex address, that Professor Bilgrami is actually giving us a new methodology of making inquiry relevant. And he has very rightly said, and he has rightly captured the mood of the 3 days seminar, where he is making that primacy of the practical, primacy of the practice is internal to pragmatism. That's an important point. So why this primacy of the practice is important in doing reflective thinking or research? Because the prepositional discussion may not actually give you critical edge to your thinking. He brings into the dichotomy between Peirce and Descartes. Descartes actually is playing his doubts on the beliefs that are in the foreground. But Peirce is not, Peirce said this is an idle thinking because it doesn't really give any clue to do a very critical inquiry. So on the one hand, you have Peirce and Descartes, and on the other, he also proposed the tension between Kant and Hegel, and Hegel would always fall back upon the resources that are available, resources in terms of the reason available in terms of collective memory, your social your social practices, your cultural your acculturation, and from there I think you can build up, you can get some new direction for your thinking. So it's really, so the notion of background is so important, and he's given, I mean, drawing on Wittgenstein, is trying to give that example of the community. And community, actually, there is no fallout for a single person from the community. The fellow has to follow the community. The community has that understanding, the meaning, and the norms of that communities are creating meaning, and the fellow has to follow those norms. So there's no deviation from the community, the community thinking, so to say. Now the question is, what are these social memories? What are these collective social practices, collective memories, and cultural practices? How do you actually build up? How do you build up a theory without really foregrounding your theory, your thing into the formal prepositional methodology? You can actually invoke practices, and I would really share with Professor Vilgami that what are those practices. Maybe classical dancing is one practice, folklore narratives are another practice. You have that these practices that are actually social practices which are actually constituting an individual. So individual is constituted through the social practices. Even though so the recalcitrant person, even though he or she is recalcitrant, deviating, but ultimately he or she is following the community norms. There is no escape from that. So I think that uh, the background conditions within which practices happen are so important for us. In our country, Professor Vilgani, you know that in universities and colleges, we have a ready-made tautological framework available. We don't go into background at all. So our research becomes kind of a Hegel's owl, it flies when in the dark, painting gray over gray. So I think your intervention as a methodological intervention is actually hinting at taking background conditions as the primary conditions in our primacy of the practice, so important. And you actually went on to doing it to straw sun and natural sciences. That is also another. The point you are making is uh, taking an objective perspective on oneself is fine, theoretically fine, but that doesn't give you any that may not really give you clear cut insight into the properties that actually lie in the world outside. I think that is so the perspective of the other is so important for actually gaining insight into the properties that actually stand outside in the world. And so uh, in all, I think it was really very insightful and engaging. I wanted to listen to you carefully. There was some interruption in the delivery, but we could gather most of it. So should I thank Professor Bilgami on your behalf? Thank you so much for yeah.
Sure.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Dr. Rahul to present a formal vote of thanks. Come over to you, Rahul.
So, well, we have come to the conclusion after 3-day deliberation. Let me first begin thanking to the valedictory speaker, Professor Akhil Bilgami, uh, who was supposed to come and be present here in person. He has made all his arrangements, booked the tickets and hotel on his own. And then unfortunately he broke his broken. He has got his right arm broken, and that's why he couldn't travel. We are really sorry, sir, and we are also missing you here. And your presentation has been really excellent. We all have enjoyed, as Professor Guru has already made this very clear. Let me also thank Professor Guru for being with us and chairing this session. And we all have been listening him in the last 3 days. So thank you so much, sir. And let me thank all those participants who have traveled to BHU and made their valuable presentations. And it has been really engaging discussion in all these 3 days. I can vouch for this that I have been not able to listen all the presentations, and this is a kind of irony when you are the organizers, where you are badly caught up with little to bigger things. So I'm going to take time to listen all these lectures uh, later on, and then we'll ponder upon it. So thank you all those participants who have made this conference possible, who have traveled from across the country and across the globe. And so thank you everyone who have agreed to come and made the presentations here. There have been nearly 30 presentations made by the scholarly people, and it has gone very fantastic. We also have 20 research scholars who have made their presentations in the parallel sessions. And I hope they all have learned a lot, as I know, I mean, I have also learned a lot from these 3 days deliberations. I'm not going to name all these research scholars who made their presentations, uh, but then certainly I'm going to take names of those research scholars who have uh, put on there a lot of efforts in the background, which are not visible, but then the conference that you see happening and making it successful, there are a lot of students who have worked day and night and made everything happen. So, and they have worked in different kinds of, you can say, work capacities. So we need many people who have helped in transportation and accommodation and decoration and food, photography, report writing, and preparing the certificate. So a tremendous work has gone behind making this event successful. I just wish to take name. So let me just quickly take the names of these research scholars. Preeti, Jyoti, Pooja, Priya, Soumya, Phul Hassan, Syali, Archana, Rinki, Ashwini, Dheeraj, Karuna, Vikas, Rishikesh, Subham, Bhim, Kamlesh, Majid, Soumya Bajpayee, Rajiva, Vikas, Preeti, Praveed, Digvijay, Shashank, Srishti, Sanjukta, Shovik, Sayantika, Nidhi, Ramesh, Rupali, Soumya, Anupam. So may I request you all to please put your hands together to clap for them. Uh, they really deserve this applause because without them, this conference could not have happened. And let me also thank our head of the department and all the faculty members who are readily available to all kinds of help and support that we need to organize such academic events. Uh, and let me also thank our Dean of Faculty of Arts, who has been very kind to accept our invitation and who came here uh, to make, to deliver his, he delivered his opening remarks. And I'm also going to request him to give some funds. So, so please, you can also clap for head of the dean of the faculty. And of course, the office person have been instrumental making this event possible. Mohanji, Neerajji, Lal Bahadurji, they're very kind person, and without them, we cannot move even an inch to having such grand events. And then let me also thank IOE, the Institution of Eminence, which has funded this conference. Without the funds, you see, nothing can happen. So the funds are also very important. And last but not the least, let me also remember Professor Anand Vaidya, who has been instrumental in this conference, who had put me in connection with many of the peoples who I never knew. And they made these scholarly people travel and made their presentations. He's been also very kind person, though he is not with us. So yeah, so I would like to observe silence for 2 minutes. Yeah, 1 minute. So, so please, yeah, Professor Anand Vaidya. Yeah, he had come earlier. Yeah. Okay. So thank you once again, everyone. And if our guests have faced any inconvenience, any difficulties, then I'm the person to be blamed for. Thank you.